All right. Good afternoon. Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation here. Today, we are joined by Garrett Harley from Oracle to go through the ENC technology chessboard. I mean, you'll have seen if you read the email a bit about his bio and the topics that we're going to cover. I've known Garrett probably close to 15 years now. He's a great speaker. He knows a lot about our industry. I saw a preview of the presentation he's going to give today. I think it's going to be entertaining. I think it'll be engaging. I think you'll learn something, and I certainly hope that we can get some participation, maybe questions, a little feedback, Q&A in the chat, or over voice if you'd like to. So without further ado, I bring you Garrett Harley.
Thanks, Mario. So thanks so much for everybody's time. And it sounded like when Mario and I had first chatted about being able to come in and give a quick talk, it was based upon what you guys had seen in your last session, which it sounded like was a review of some of the sort of emerging technologies that are coming into ENC. And there is a ton going on right now, right? I think we've seen more investment in this space from a technology perspective in the last 5 to 6 years than we've ever seen. And certainly venture capital has proved that point. And that's kind of where I wanted to just pick up is when Mario and I were talking about what content might be fun. This is not going to be really about Oracle much at all. And I really want to do that by design. I think it's more fun for us to just talk about the challenges that we all know are out there, and collectively, together is really the only way we ultimately solve those things. So I'll hopefully this will be engaging, and I'd love for questions to come on along the way. So let me just give you a bit of background around me, and we'll just dive right in. So I started my career at Bechtel a little over 25 years ago now as a project controls engineer. And that was pretty much cost and schedule for mostly, at that point in time, I worked in a section of Bechtel called Bechtel National, and it was really government contracts. So our larger programs and projects on primarily infrastructure and mostly in power. So that was, most of the US's nuclear facilities. I worked on many of those projects, as well as a lot of our large infrastructure projects. And I learned a lot of the technology that is used to manage construction projects when I was there. And the beautiful part about being at a place like Bechtel is you learn through rotation. So when you're in controls, they cycle you through learning estimating, and then you do a stint in scheduling, and you do a stint in contracts, you do a stint in procurement. You just rotate around through to learn all the disciplines of effectively how we manage programs and projects. But I left Bechtel and ultimately moved over to join Primavera in 1997. So I learned all the software while I was at Bechtel and fell in love with the software and sort of the tech side of things, and moved over to support the tech side of things. That business was acquired, and if anyone else is, I know sometimes it's hard to tell if folks are on mute. I'm getting a little bit of background. It sounds like, well, anyway, if you're not on mute, feel free to go on mute and hop back off if you got a question. So Primavera was acquired by Oracle in 2008, and I stayed on for a little over 10 years, and I did a variety of different things. And as far as the leadership roles, for our sales, solution consulting, and engineering component all the way through product marketing. I ran our industry strategy group for engineering and construction through several of our acquisitions at the time while we were back at Oracle. And then I left to go work in the startup world for a few years. Obviously, seeing how the venture capital market is interested, and as I think we saw mobility hit construction projects and programs like a sledgehammer. And I think the interesting part about mobility and cloud types of runs for computing is it just changed the audiences of who would be able to participate on projects more than we ever really had in the past. So I went off to work for an ENC startup for a couple of years, and I just came back. So I came back about a year ago, and I'm just as excited as ever on effectively, still trying to figure out the problems that we all know are challenged on major programs and projects. So that's me in a nutshell. And here's what I want to go through today. We're going to talk a little bit about a continuation of what you probably saw and discussed a lot of last time. But we'll talk sort of about the major players that are out there on the chessboard, and what are these guys doing? Like, what are ultimately the end games for most of these types of companies? What is it they're really trying to achieve? And then we'll talk about, well, what's the answer that we should ultimately arrive at? And I refer to this, or several of us out there that speak on this, frequently refer to these as smart construction platforms. And smart construction platforms are ultimately ways that we're developing ecosystems where interoperable applications can actually start sharing data in a more meaningful way, irrespective of who the authors are. So while everyone is trying to deal with their own proprietary formats of information, ultimately the winner, in my view, will be the people that are really good about being able to create ecosystems where interoperable information can exist and thrive. And we'll talk kind of briefly about some pragmatic steps that we can make, together to, try and move the ball. So if you haven't seen it, and maybe by runs for show of hands in the chat or something, we can go through to see this. If you got a chance to see the Queen's Gambit on Run for Netflix, I just got hooked. My family, we just cooked through this thing. We binged it over a full Run for weekend. I think we must have eaten at least 10 bags of popcorn. And the good news is this is really sort of the left side of this is kind of the major players that are out there right now, at least within our, kind of core engineering and construction space. And on the right side is, this is not by no means a full list of the types of companies that are in this round for the startup world, but this is just a fraction of the ones that are out there that have come to existence within the last 4 to 5 years. And Oracle, Autodesk, Hexagon, Trimble, Procore, you could probably throw Bentley onto that same part for the list now. These have been companies that have organically grown through either, their own round for software development, or they've built or partnered or acquired, technologies to extend what these guys do. But, if I was going to break this down into something really simple, when I talk about explaining the chessboard, to me, it really just falls down into 3 phases. And it kind of goes like this. For most of us, when we decide we want to go through and do something, we start off with effectively the design phase. And that's the scope. That's how we ultimately arrive at, how big is this thing? What are we actually going to make? What is it going to look like? And then once we've made those decisions, now it's about how do we bring multiple teams together, multiple companies together, ultimately to build whatever this thing is. And that's our construct phase. And at the end, now that we've made this thing, we have to figure out how to take care of it. And hopefully that's for a long time. That's our operate and maintain phase. So there's obviously many sub phases that sit within these, and there's sub phases that operate between the boundaries of these. But at a super simple form, this is effectively the stage of data that projects go through. We got to figure out what acts are going to do. That's our design. We take the design, those become construction documents. We move those over the fence into our build teams. We actually go out there and finish the build of those assets, whatever those assets are. We move it into, enterprise asset management sorts of tools where we ultimately are operating and maintaining those assets, hopefully across a much longer lifespan, 30, 50, 70 years. And if you looked at the chessboard of where most companies, like how most companies play, it's really this simple. So let's say that we're Autodesk. I started off as a scope company, and that's my DNA. My DNA is I'm a design shop. And what I want to do is I want to do as much as I can to own the lane that I started in, as much of the data in the lane that I started in as I possibly can. And when I'm done with that, I want to effectively look to move my value into further phases to grow my business. And that's exactly what they've done, right? So they have built, partnered, or acquired to the right, primarily of where they've been. So what about us? Well, we kind of started as a pure project management company, cost and schedule and contracts and earn value and all the other fun things that we do on programs. So that pure, really it's before the design information. We're a consumer of design information, but we don't really get involved in a lot of the design process stuff. Those construction documents ultimately feed what we do in managing the construction process, but you carry that forward into further rounds for phases. So, ultimately, if you start thinking about what the strategy is for a lot of these types of companies, it's to, again, dominate the lane that you are in, do as best as you can within the lane that you're in, and then look to make yourself relevant, more relevant, increasingly relevant in alternate phases. So what does that mean for everyone that's out there? They want to have a leg into every single one of these columns. I want to be able to play with or operate or work with design information when and how it makes sense. I want to be able to help carry that information all the way through the construction process. I want to be able to feed that information into ultimately what happens during our operation and maintenance phase. And you've seen these companies do exactly this. Hexagon has acquired this way. Oracle has acquired this way. Autodesk has acquired this way. Procore, even in their latest one, has also run for acquired this way. And this is sort of where the spends have happened. And this is kind of interesting. And we can have I'd like to hold like a pretty just objective, frank conversation on like, what have we gotten back for this? Because there has been a whole bunch of money that's been thrown at these problems. And, arguably some of them do this better than others. So in 2016, Oracle spent $664 million and buys Textura. And effectively, that was to really own the payment process. Textura came with a lot of different things on that cart, but really what it was good at was the payment process, that whole section of being able to deal with the electronic ACH process rather than a check process of how we go through and pay one another. And in the US anyway, more specifically, that kind of tends to favor the lien waiver process. In 2017, they spent 1.2 on a little company called Aconex, which is based in Australia, and great at effectively what I'll just kind of call, the non-costed document control part of what we do in construction. So interesting because it's not a document run for a register in its traditional way. It's not based upon folder structures. It's really based upon the metadata around documents, which is what really makes it unique. It's a neutral way to be able to share information with lots of different parties. You can selectively decide to share what information you want and keep the things you don't. It's actually, kind of true to the way we build stuff. Trimble turns around in 2018 and buys eBuilder for $500 million. It's probably no coincidence that Trimble, says the exact same round for the number and spends exactly 1.2 on the acquisition for Viewpoint. Autodesk starts jumping into this game and buys a company called Assemble, which is great at being able to take, again, design information and throw that in for quantity takeoffs and move it over into more of like that next lane over for the construction process. And buys PlanGrid in 2018 for $875 million. Procore isn't public yet, but starts still going through rounds for seed money on rounds, and their Series H happens in 2018 for $75 million. Autodesk keeps spending and puts a little bit more into that construction lane out of that design lane and buys a company called Building Connected for $275 million in 2019, which is not really the pure construction lane, but you can think of it as straddling that design and construction lane with pre-con, right? So in that pre-con process, we're sending out bids. We're trying to qualify bidders. We're really looking at, from the owner side, exactly, are we getting, people to comply with what our initial runs for requirements are? We hand that off to a contractor. They send that out through the supply chain. We start looking at what the math is. Is that all rolls back up to us? That's basically what Building Connected does. And Procore in 2019 buys a company called BIM Anywhere, as well as another company called Honest Buildings, another company in 2020 called Esticom, and releases their IPO, pulls the IPO, in 2020, but goes public in 2021. And that was actually just in May of this past year. And just as of yesterday, day before, announced a little $500 million spend on a company called Levelset, which is really similar to a similar problem that Textura solves in the payment process. So, it seems like a lot of money, right? So on any given one of these things, you might be able to do some just rough napkin math and say, okay, geez, this is in the neighborhood of getting up towards, 2 to 3 billion. This is upwards in the round for the same thing on the total rounds for between, 1 to 1.2 to, 2 point whatever. If you looked at the full breadth of everything else that Meridian has been involved in those things, Trimble's bought a lot of different stuff over time. Autodesk spend, between 2 to 3 billion. The Procore IPO, and then a section of removing that out of the cash and being able to go out and immediately onto the market after that raise and spend another 500 million. So it's a lot of money being thrown at this, and the results I think are mixed, right? If we're just honest about how well everybody's doing, it's good and bad. There tends to be, when you buy a lot of stuff, it's difficult for people to understand the clarity on the roadmap, right? And strategies vary. If you're going to buy a lot of things, ultimately what you want to do, or you should want to do, is meaningfully integrate those things. And this has kind of been, like the problem with some of like every vendor struggles with some of these things. Some do it better than others. But the clarity on the roadmap, I think from an industry being objective about it, gets hard to really understand. Obviously, as you have more pressure in what you've gone out to acquire and looking for your payback timelines, it can become, and it has become, increasingly expensive in a a section of the market where, we spend generally in construction, around 1% of our revenue goes towards information technology on average. And relative to other industries, that's just amazingly low. But it's still the norm, right? So we don't tend to do a lot of run for investment in technology, but I think, it's slowly starting to change. The more stuff you acquire, or the more stuff that you do, the more problems you want to go out there and solve, the harder it is to feel from an end user's perspective, from a customer's perspective, like that pace of innovation is actually really moving you forward. So that can feel, and it often does feel, like things have really slowed down. And then because you have a bigger company now behind those things, which is great because it can deal with the consolidation and scale that enterprises need, it can also feel like you get a reduction in some of the service and support that you have around for offering. And this is especially true for a lot of people that are transitioning from an on-premise paradigm into a cloud paradigm. And truthfully, that the information that you can maintain and the value that you get as a cloud company in being able to see more readily, faster, what people are doing within your platform to be able to help diagnose problems faster. The service actually goes up, but it's a hard transition to obviously make because, I know how to shop in the store that I'm in, and I don't always want to walk into a new store if I don't have to. But this is pretty objective on what the results have been. A lot of money been thrown at this, and we still got work to do, which seems kind of crazy, but that's just true. So here's my kind of feel about this. I have this problem where I get sent to go shopping. And if I looked at this objectively on what the industry still says they really want from us, they really want 4 things. So the basic pillars that ultimately all of the vendors that you just saw on that previous page still have to deliver and have yet to do it is I need scope, I need schedule, I need resources and quantities, and I need cost. And I would love to have all of that in one thing, ideally. But this has kind of been the experience that most of us get on our actual, right? I get sent to go out and do this. Hey, you know what? In its most basic form, if you could just bring me back something that helps move scope information, help me develop more meaningful schedules from it, more accurate schedules from it, help me deal with my quantity takeoffs from that scope, load those things. Why do we have all this stuff? Was there a question?
Yeah, I think I don't
Yeah.
know. We lost you.
Cut out there for just a second. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we
back
back?
now. We got you. Yeah, you're back.
All right, great. Sorry, so I'm not sure where I'd broken out, but hopefully I think the pictures might have made sense. But yeah, certainly ping me if it looks like I have to catch up. So this is honestly what I think a lot of us feel like on any given day as customers, right? When clear direction really isn't easy to recognize, we struggle with what to do. And we use lots of different things. And sometimes it's hard to know, well, which of the things that are now in the arsenal of what any of these vendors do is actually for me anymore. Like where do I actually see myself in that process? Is this for owners now? Is this for owners and GCs? Is this for owners, GCs, and subs? I need to, I ultimately just want to be able to find something that helps me do what my business is about. I need to plan things. I need to build things. I need to operate things. I'm a delivery team. I'm on the contractor side. I need to pursue the right work. I need to do that work profitably, and I need to do it again and again and again and again. So ultimately, it's about trying to force communities onto that same coin, and this has been tough. So this is when I came back to Oracle. I had just finished reading this book, and I had many talks with our executive teams to go through and kind of discuss this and how we go through to sort of even discuss cleaning our own things up, right? We've acquired a lot of different things. How are we going through to rationalize and build the right integrations, the right meaningful interoperability between a whole host of things that we do? And there's a lot of interesting puzzle pieces that we have in that puzzle box. But, I think the reality is that sometimes it feels like some assembly has always been required. So there's this great quote out of this book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And Ben Horowitz is one of the guys that founded the AZ16 Round for Venture Capital Fund. Really great book. And what he says in it, and I won't go verbatim off of it, but he says, look, if you're going to change your mind, if you're going to change direction, if you're actually going to go through and make decisions on where you want to lead to, and if some of the things that you've done to date haven't exactly worked out the way that you wanted, then be bold about it. If you're going to eat it, don't nibble. Just make big, meaningful change on the big, meaningful change that you know needs to happen. Validate on the areas that you've gone sideways and fix it. So this is the opportunity. Why fixing it is so important for all of us is, I think, recognition that these big types of changes really boils down to looking at how companies recognize what these changes mean to everybody, whether I'm in the office or I'm in the field, and I'm willing to adapt to it. I'm going to put team and resources and money and time and energy into how I go through to adapt to fix these things. And great companies are really good at this. They're objective and they're adaptive. But here's the opportunities: is we've never lived in a time with the opportunity to put a computer in the pocket of 5 billion people. And I saw this in engineering construction projects the day that, first round for cloud technologies. And we rolled this back to around for the early 2000s. But when mobility hit, this truthfully changed the game in my view, of how every single construction project on the planet was going to be able to get a completely different experience of engagement, and how I could move information closer to where the user really was. If I'm out in the field, I could now start pushing information all the way down into that, application, all the way down to wherever the boots on the ground were. And that's exciting, right? Because hopefully what we should get out of that is more informed decision making, because I'm closer to the work itself. Now I just need to figure out how I work within the hierarchies of how those decisions typically happen. And we have tons of ways that we do this within a lot of application layers today. I think the hack that we're all interested in now is, how do I actually still work within the hierarchy when I need to, but how can I work outside of it if I want to be able to generate speed? And we understand this problem, right? I think collectively we've all been beaten up. This isn't a new study, but this is a McKinsey round for an old study that sort of talks about the productivity layer that our industry has been in for the better part of 2 decades. And we're, hovering about, somewhere between a little over 5%. I think agriculture and forestry and hunting are still a little bit more than us, but that doesn't mean that we haven't thrown a lot of tech into this problem. But I think this is the fun part, right? So the back and the front office really set a lot of the solution tone and the investments that most companies and organizations made through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And the field is really the transformational frontier where a lot of this waste reduction and innovation is currently happening. If you look at the amount of venture capital that has been thrown into in just, let's say, 2019, 2020, I think 2019 was somewhere in the neighborhood of a little over 4 billion. And 2020, it was on pace to be able to go through to eclipse that. So a massive amount of bets are being placed into this section of the market, because we have opportunity. We have a lot of waste that we can go through to capture. We have a lot of ways that we can fix problems differently than we ever did these things before. And there are really clear benefits to modern approaches. But by just putting information that I deal with every day onto cloud types of infrastructure, I can get productivity improvements in the 50 to 60% range. That's amazing. And why is that amazing? Well, because instead of having me always be bound to have to walk back to the office or walk back to the trailer to get the information that I need, I can now get it wherever I'm standing. And with job site technology specifically, there's about a 4 to 6% cost savings right out of the gate. That's real money. And especially if we start thinking about how big and many programs we run at the same time, that's a force multiplier, like more than one project at a time. And it's really about bridging sort of these 3 main areas, right? I run a back office, I run a front office, which is where most of our traditional program controls have sat. And we have huge teams that sit there. But I have a field office that has a series of needs that are obviously unique to what they do. And I ultimately want to integrate all 3. So I tend to, it's a little hokey, but I call this the BFF for construction. I need the back, the front, and the field. And whoever is the vendor that goes out there and can meaningfully integrate all three wins. So innovation journeys require a clear plan, pretty bold action, and follow through. And I think that there is a serious leapfrog moment out there for vendors and teams who are willing to attack this problem to go out there and get it. But this is still what it feels like for most of us on any given day, right? You know, like we're so close. We feel like, why can't you guys just get your act together? Why can't, why can't we work more closely with our, folks that are on the scope side? Why can't we work more closely with our folks that are on, the EAM and operations side? Why can't and that's true for all of those rounds for vendors. This is why I think the neutrality and the way that we go through to be able to think about smart construction platforms and how ecosystems should and need to operate. I'll just give you one simple example on one place that, still is undelivered in the market. So this is a really simple example, but I call it the wouldn't this be nice? And this is something that no vendor that I know of on the planet has actually done this. But if I work in the field around for the office, I would love this. And it starts off here. So let's say I build a master schedule. And let's say that I start with putting those major milestones out into that schedule. And I break out my scopes of work and I line out all my activities. And I do that with my superintendents. I do that with my project schedulers and all my trade partners. That basically helps me define all the systems that are going to actually get built and all the workflows that have to happen between companies. And I want to be able to run those things in 3 to 6 week look aheads. Now, I'm going to transition that down into something we refer to in a lot of lean construction use cases as my weekly work plan. And my weekly work plan includes the tasks, not the activities. Tasks are still work, but they're the breakdown of that initial schedule that's over on the left, that master schedule. But I don't need to build a more detailed CPM network. And we do this all the time. It's like counter space. I remember when we first came out with the first version of Windows in Primavera, the entire database could only capture about 100,000 records. 100,000. There's programs that I've worked on that have over 100,000 tasks, activities, millions and millions of activities. Because we have more space to be able to do it, as the computing power got bigger, we started just filling up the counter space. We built bigger schedules. Are they better? I think it's debatable, right? They're 25 times bigger than the schedules that we created in 1985. That's crazy. Just the fact that we can do it doesn't mean that it's always a great idea. But the task work, if I can take the activities from a more simplified CPM framework and I can break those down and hand them over to the field team and say, here's a general activity description. It's understood. Here's the start and stop of when you want it to begin and end. Go ahead and break that thing down into the details that you need as the field team to manage production and the production rate. And you build out those correct durations inside the lanes of what that activity framework said. You tell me the manpower. I do it with my trade partners. It's still grounded on the systems that we're out there going through to build. It ties directly into the workflows because I'm structurally tying what my field teams do with what my office team has done on that contract schedule. And I do all this with my trade partner staff. So that's a way for me to include my supply chain into the planning and execution process. Let's move over to safety. So safety operations still happen on tasks, and I can outline all the hazards that I experience. And we will all talk through the actions that we use to eliminate those hazards. I do that with my trade partners and my superintendent and all my foremen that are actually out and around for site. And I have this great thing that I carry around in my pocket that can take pictures and can log videos, and I can talk to and will take dictations, and all of this stuff can feed directly back into that system. And what if I could also, in one solution set, so we've covered how to build my schedule, how to develop my weekly work plans, how to capture all my safety information, and then ultimately report my dailies. What if I was still going through and checking off all the things that I got done? So here's the things that I committed to for the week in my weekly work plan. Did I get those things done? Yes or no. If I need to recommit them. I still have a capture of all my safety observations in my dailies. I track my manpower there. I do that as trade partner huddles. I update the manpower on my go forward. I sign it off. I do it with a digital signature. We talk about the next week's runs for the look ahead. Away we go. And today, unfortunately, any one of these columns might actually be a different piece of software. Like, that's crazy. So we wonder why this is hard. Why this is hard is because I've got all these different things that I do on a daily, weekly basis, and there's zero integration or zero meaningful, easy integration for me to actually tie all these things together contextually, where I am and what role I play. This is still unmet in the market. So what are we trying to do about this? Well, one way to do it is to basically try and find a place where you could create a petri dish where you invite different, vendors in on different types of business problems, and you let them iterate, right? You let them basically innovate on their own and re-demonstrate whether or not things are working or not working. And at least here at Oracle, what we've done, and I encourage anyone, no matter who they are, to go out there and take advantage of these facilities. We have one here in the States. We have one that's being built down in Australia. And it's designed for exactly that. It's a lab where you can see a bunch of different partners that you want to work with. Again, think through that whole army of new startup types for companies that are solving some sort of interesting problem that you care about, and put them into a box where you can actually see those things work together and force the vendors to actually interoperate. That should be the goal of this. And the benefit of the lab, in my view, for anyone, is to really try and meet the industry where we really do stuff. So I think about this kind of like a breach, land, and expand. I breach into something like what the lab does as far as an open round for a petri dish, because sometimes it's difficult to be able to do this on live projects. As much as we want to be able to do this on live projects, sometimes it's safer, and we don't want to take all the risk of doing those investments on runs for live projects. But you could use something like the lab and throw a business problem out into it, and maybe that's an isolated problem, maybe it's a more widespread problem. And then once it's proven, you deploy that, right? So we prove that it really works. And then once we prove that it can work on one, then great. I take those experiences back, and I can try and figure out how to scale that across multiple programs, across multiple projects, and repeat that. So this is, in my view, really what a smart construction platform, and this is true for lots of run for vendors, but obviously this is going to be a little bit more slanted on like what is Oracle doing, around these things? What is the longer term vision of what we're up to? It's really the tenets of this. So if you look in the middle is driven based upon a common data environment, and that basically deals with a whole lot of disparate information that we have to catalog and capture today, and it sits in lots of different places, whether that's resource information, or it's capital planning information, or it's schedule, or it's risk, or it's scope, or it's QA QC. And I have this whole problem that I have this iteration around this life cycle of what I need to do on planning and building and operating my assets. And what I ultimately want at the end is I need a digital twin. I would love a digital twin of whatever my asset is, so I could see the virtual components of it in live. And I've sort of referred to that, at least in the building world, we talk about it as an as-built model, and as well as an as-found and an as-maintained model. And this is kind of what it feels like. So we do a portfolio management component, and as an owner, I have a capital plan. I have a bag of money. I got to figure out how I really want to spend that money. I've got a mix of CapEx projects and OpEx projects. I want to be able to ultimately make decisions on what that mix looks like, and then I shake out which projects I'm ultimately going to go out and do. And I begin the build phase. That's when I start hiring contractors. That's when I start looking at more of my, my relationships within my supply chain. And this just keeps happening kind of over and over and over again, because obviously you don't just build things one time. Like you have, as an owner, I have lots of things that I'm ultimately involved in around for a capital plan. We have different rounds for sections of road, or I've got different sections of rounds for facilities that are being, put in. We're expanding the airport. We're doing something else. So I've got to deal with a rolling wave of what that capital plan looks like. And then I want to be able to sort of move asset information up or down within that planning cycle. And I need something that really helps me bridge the gap between those two, because it's iterative. So it should start with a common data environment on some sort of round for, clear, secure, round for infrastructure. The foundations that ultimately get poured in all of this need to really matter, and especially for the types of sensitivity that certain types of assets have. It's just a non-starter anymore, right? We absolutely have to make sure that this stuff is secure. This is true for every vendor. And then if we roll that up into, well, we have applications that we run, and we have a series of rounds for servicing the things that those applications do via APIs. And that's part of where you're going to start seeing that get interoperable with the rest of the ecosystem. And there's a variety of applications that, truthfully, no matter what those applications are, these are just the applications that obviously we run. But this is where you're going to see those intersections ultimately take place. So I've got a common layer around for services. Those services talk about where you're going to be doing the meaningful interoperability between applications. The application layer should look common, meaning that I have an experience that lets me ultimately go in and out of these things. And I start playing with a variety of other ecosystem players and partners that aren't even necessarily me, right? So I've got to look at ways that I deal with not just our own information that we can capture in our own tools, but how do we start interoperability with others' tools? And if you extend that all the way out, that gets into all sorts of other fun stuff where I just call it like the shiny object conversation. Like, what are we doing around IoT? What are we doing around prefabrication? What are we doing about equipment metrics? What are we doing about the handover process? What are we doing about integrations to our finance and our layout systems? And we throw all of that, ultimately longer term into an intelligence cloud where I can start making more predictive decisions about a variety of different data sources. So wherever those data sources are, and we have a hub experience, and that hub is effectively so that you enter it, ideally you enter it, and it knows who you are when you've done your part for your sign-on, and it can just kind of take you down the rabbit hole of whatever the data set is that you care about the most. So if you need to go experience stuff on looking at the schedule, great. It knows who you are. It lets you walk directly down into the schedule. Oh, you need to go look at the contracts. You walk in there, you go right down into the contract section. So that lobby experience, that hub, is where you're going to start, seeing that common data environment be able to balloon you out into other experiences depending upon who you are and where you need to go. And this is obviously our thinking on this, but truthfully, this sort of thinking is kind of where everyone's trying to, solve the problem. And it should revolve around what that common data environment ultimately is. So as you bring information into those ecosystems and make it transparent and usable across that environment, ultimately at the end state, as the owner, I want to be able to look at my data from the very beginning of it in the design process, all the way through those, my construction column, all the way into my operations and maintenance column. So what are some pragmatic things that we can all kind of do? And when I sort of give advice, whether I talk to owners or delivery teams, it really sort of boils down to, well, hey, let's at least evaluate and look at the way that our current specs are. And what are we asking for? And as owners, there's kind of two ways that this has been done in the past, and this probably will still continue to happen. I either decide one of two things. I decide that I want to have everyone use the same type of shovel, and I write that into a specification because it's a format issue, right? I want to receive the same sort of round for formats. I'll accept Excel. I'll accept, rounds for certain format structures because I know how to deal with those formats. The other option is just to own the sandbox, right? You pick the platform that works for you. And once you're in that platform, you hand out shovels. And it's yours, right? And truthfully, what a lot of delivery teams do anyway is, they're passing the cost of what that software is for them to run into the fee that ultimately owners pay for anyway. So I don't know, I go back and forth on this whole thing. Formatting is certainly a way to get compliance, and it is a way to be able to deal with transference of information. But every single time that we have to pick information up and move it out or back in some way, shape, or form, we run risks on corruption, and we run risks on data integrity. We have, it's not that it can't be clean, and it can't be easy, but it doesn't tend to be. Sometimes being able to just own the sandbox, is another thought. And from an owner's perspective, this is kind of where I have a lot of folks start is, let's just solve the what projects to do problem first. And that's really based upon what's the strategy end state? how do we even know that we're working on the right stuff? So if I've got this bag of capital, how do I know that I'm reasonably looking at that capital and that operations and expenditure capital together to build one series of around for a 5, 10, 15-year plan that I know needs to iterate? And once that I've got that decision done, am I really going out there and doing projects right, which is what I just call kind of like leveling up the basics. So whether it's looking at, what we want from a compliance perspective from our contractors and our supply chain on the schedule quality that we get, or if it's on the number of issues and risks that we define, or it's on the timeframes and SLAs that we develop on how quickly we turn documents and decisions around. So there's all sorts of the basics, right? The 4 basic things that we ask for in the shopping cart. Do I understand the scope? Do I understand the schedule? Do I understand the resources? Do I understand the costs? And then there are so many different shiny objects that are out there. And what I mean by that is there's so much as far as new startups that have great stories and interesting mousetraps, but they're not magic bullets. And I think what you really want to also do is be selective. It's okay to be picky. It's okay to be picky about, what, I really want to test a use case on that. And that's exactly where things like the lab experience could be a benefit. So find a specific problem, make it a specific problem, make sure that it fits a series of a use case that you want to see solved, and don't treat it like it's going to, solve world hunger. It probably won't solve world hunger. They're not always magic bullets. But if we incrementally go out there and run those types of test cases, and you push vendors together in that type of an environment, that's just the truth, right? The truth is it's going to be a multi-vendor. It should be a multi-vendor, potentially like a multi-cloud solution for most people. We de-risk a lot of things if we can actually get multiple parties to work together. And that's true for, honestly, how we deal with a lot of our construction projects. So I'll end with a quote from a guy that I like. I like this guy. So he says, "For our industry, I believe that the race worth winning is how to provide the most context-relevant experiences to the office and the field professionals who deliver all types of engineering and construction projects all over the world." I truly believe that. This should be what every vendor out there on the planet should want to do. Okay, I know that's quick, hopefully interesting, entertaining. And if you guys have questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Excellent. Yes, thank you, Garrett. Appreciate it. Yeah, if you guys have any questions or even experiences you want to relay, feedback, please speak up. Go for it.
Garrett, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I do have one question. As you showed that last slide with that kind of all-encompassing common data environment, how does Oracle build that out without alienating partners that are also using Oracle Cloud as their central database, such as CMIC?
Right. Yeah, good question. So to me, the CMIC container, it's really about trying to figure out ways that the finance information, which is a lot of what CMIC is really helping manage. I mean, it certainly can help manage more of the project management components as well. But, it's the timing of it, right? So I look at it on a use case by use case basis, but truthfully, it gets into more of the blocking and tackling on if I'm using CMIC for my core financial information, then I need to be able to figure out how to pass that, right? Because it's going to own my rate tables, it's going to own my overheads, it's going to own my burdens, but the detailed resource information might actually need to exist on the schedule. Let's say that that's a resource assignment, and I need to be able to pass the quantities of that into a common data environment where ultimately it can get correctly costed based upon the information that is really maintained in CMIC. So to me, it's about how do you get it into a place where you can ultimately have the integrations work and without having it always feel like it's a proprietary plumbing. And everyone has their own way that they're going to come at this mousetrap, right? I think this is the hard part about it. The hard part about it is that left to themselves, most of these companies, will always look at it as wanting to keep you in the format that they can control. And that generally sort of makes me nervous. So I would rather look at it from a standards base, and I'd rather look at it from like back to Ben's quote, I'd rather look at it from you don't need me to help. You don't need me to own that, but you need me to work with it. Gotcha. Like, okay, let's figure that out. So it's a cloud to cloud component. As long as the APIs between those two components and getting into the CDE are robust enough, and this is part of what I think needs to ultimately get tested, out in the market. I mean, like, this isn't to say that we don't have work to do on our own. We have tons. I mean, the Primavera Cloud schedule component, I still have work to do on all their APIs that I know are going to be required to be able to make it work with other systems. So everyone's going to have to step up. And I think because customers deserve it.
Garrett, I actually did have a question. I don't know if this is if I'm taking anyone else's time here, but so I work in project controls, and one of the things that that we face quite often is the integration of our contractor schedules in with the master schedule that we as the owner are
Right.
trying to report against.
Yep.
Producing believable measurements of progress or in value, what the resource utilization has been,
Right.
pulling all that together for reporting across leadership. And I guess sort of on the ground level, is there really kind of a recommendation or a thought that you might have around the difference of sending and receiving schedules back and forth between us as the owner and the subcontractors, or
Right.
if we were to have a single environment that everyone played in together, for schedule cost, et cetera, et cetera?
Yep. Great question. And yeah, still work to do, Mario. Like, just truthfully, still work to do. Here's my idea. So today, like the way that currently happens, and you can tell me if this is off base at all, but the way that currently happens today is it's basically just like a format, import, export. I ask for a file format. I send it to you as the contractor. It's a way for you to be able to bring it into your database.
Yes, correct.
And that's fine, right? There's like an XER format, or you could pull these things and run for XML, and either one of those things has benefits and drawbacks. XERs are sledgehammers into the database. XML is a little bit more nuanced, but it's slower. I think a lot of customers basically land at this point. I could handle slower, provided that it's accurate. And I'm willing to have some trade-offs within it. Well, here's what I'd rather see. What I'd rather see is have us do a better job in scenario management than we do today. And as the contractor, really the need is to go in and run my scenario, update my scenario, submit it for approval, and let you decide which scenario you want, instead of having it be individual run for XCR imports or XML imports that you have to do, which is just heavy lifting for you. So we do scenario management within Oracle Primavera Cloud today, but we got work to do, right? I mean, it's good, but it's not good enough. It's not clean enough. We need to have a different layer for security for folks to be able to get into just that version. And then ideally, like, this is the way I would want it to work. Ideally, you go ahead and I hand you the initial CPM contract schedule. And then I basically say, here, take this whole task engine and just blow out whatever you need to do for the execution side. That's your sandbox. I've given you the framework. Here's the lanes of the road. Go into the task tool and just blow out what you need to be able to do. Include all the trade partners, like back to those kind of 4 things that we still talked about that are kind of unmet. That's where I want the details to actually get entered into what I just refer to as like the one schedule, the one structurally connected schedule. But as we go through an update, what I want to have happen is I want to be able to do that run for the update within the scenario process. And the reason why is because even me as the contractor, I'm running scenarios before that submission anyway, because I tend to want to pick the one that I know I can really deliver to. And I'm making trade-offs in that file all the time, right? So like, okay, well, what happens if I double the resources? Do we speed this up? Well, what happens if I, change the labor rate on these 5 resources and then go ahead and run a recalc? Like, I'm playing in the scenario pieces, and I want to run those scenarios in a black box and have it not hit the production database until I'm ready to say, good, it's good. And then I want to submit that to the owner and let them approve it. And then it's just a button that they would hit. Like, I want to be able to hit this is the scenario that you're submitting. Great. I'm going to go through those, pieces line by line, and I'm just going to approve. And if it's approved, that is the current schedule. Done. I'm not importing and exporting anything. I'm just playing in that same community file. It's not even a file, but I'm playing in that community project. Ideally, that's the way, that we're looking for it to run. But, we're not quite there yet. But the scenario management component and the ways that we go through to currently let you manage baselines, we're on the right track.
Yeah, that's quite different from how we actually do it today. So
totally,
wow, yeah,
totally different, right? And
I can see the advantages and the challenges there, but yeah, wow, that's
so right. And the tough part is for me as the contractor, I will have a point where I'll probably want that information back out, because I use it to improve my business, right? But this happens on projects all the time. We keep submitting things in. And we run all these because we can handle submitting things in, right? The database can handle lots and lots of runs for information, like back to that P3 days where it was 100,000 records. Like now you can throw as much of the database as you want. But it doesn't mean that it's a great idea, right? And the reason why we always maintain these separate rounds for these versions on stuff is because we're all too worried about getting dragged into court. But the scenario process, if the scenario process and the security around the scenario process was cleaner, and I felt comfortable coming in there to run that all in a black box, and I know that that black box is where I'm supposed to iterate, then I'm probably good with it. Because the owner's not seeing that right out of the gate anyway. Like, I'm not having to run 2 different versions of the schedule that I do today anyway. It's nuts. So I'd love to just clean that whole thing up, right? So that it's waste. It's part of that waste that we still get into in not just the structural, ways that we put the projects, schedules together, but it's just the waste in how much time I've got to deal with. All right, well, boy, we've never really just cleaned the process up. We never even thought about having it be a different process. What would the tech do to let me run a completely different process than I do today? That's like why I got so excited about things on mobile back then. I'm like, mobile will change the way that our processes work. And I feel like the scenario management component is exactly how that should ultimately happen in the schedule. But, stay tuned. We're going to need more help. As we keep, getting closer on the development side for that, we're going to need people to, get in there and beat it up. And, I'll be a volunteer, but I'll need more.
Awesome. Thank you. So I do see that we are just a little over the top of the hour. So I understand folks might need to drop off for another call. If there are other questions, I don't know, Garrett, are you happy to stick around or?
I'm happy to stick around. The other way that I'll obviously feed folks my email. Feel free to get a hold of me anytime through that. If you have things that strike you later. That's fine. It's super easy. It's just garrett.harley@oracle.com. And I'm happy to take any questions that strike you any point in time. So grateful for everyone's attention. Grateful for you taking a little bit of time out on a Friday. Hopefully I'm not keeping you from a cocktail.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Garrett. We appreciate your time. And thank you, folks, for joining today. Like I said, we will post this recording on the website for those that weren't able to attend, so we can share that around. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday. Mahalo.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.